always helps to visualize who you're writing for. And within the context of scientific writing and medical writing, there are a few audiences which come up time and time again, such as the general public or other scientists, or even people with a background in medicine, so medical doctors, would be examples of audience that you might want to visualize before beginning to write. The other reason why it's important to think about audience is that every type of audience have one or two main questions that they're trying to answer when they read something. So with the general public, for instance, the question in their minds is, how is this relevant to my life? With the scientific audience, science is all about answering unanswered questions. It's about going into new territories, undiscovered territories, and discovering new things. So the scientific audience would be asking, what is known, what is unknown, and what do we need to do in order to go from the known to the unknown? And the medical audience would be asking, how is this going to impact the way I practice medicine? Or how is this going to impact the way I speak with patients, or the way I prescribe medicines, or how is this going to change or have an influence on the way I do things? So looping back to your question on why an audience is important, it's important because it's only when you visualize the audience that you get a sense of what might be questions which are driving them in their work or in their life. And by answering those questions, you can reach those audiences much better.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's great that we're starting with a really high level, almost umbrella categories of the audiences, because then it gets so specific. And I think this is one of the challenges that new writers have, is that they say, oh, I'm writing for a lay audience. And they think that means that they've defined their target reader, but they haven't, because that could be hundreds of thousands of different people. So it's then like, okay, well, given that we know that they're a lay audience, what else do we know about them? And it's kind of asking questions about, who is this? What are they trying to learn? How does it apply to their life? How is it going to be useful to them? Why are they coming here in the first place? Like, those are the kinds of questions you want to be asking yourself when you're figuring out who that lay audience reader actually is. But yeah, I do think it's really important to start with like those overarching categories, because it's almost like there's a tree diagram or something, and it's like right at the top, it's like there's these three categories. You pick one of them and then you kind of go to the next level, and then each time you answer a question about that reader, you're kind of going deeper and deeper into that tree, to the point where you have enough knowledge about who they are to be able to tailor the piece towards them. So, I mean, segueing into our next question, why do you need to focus your communication approach? So in that, when you have your target reader, why is it important that you have a really good idea of who that reader is so that you can focus your writing?
Well, first off, your readers live in different worlds. Someone who is in the medical world would be well versed with medical terminology. Someone in the scientific world, for instance, would be well versed with their specific area of science. And someone who doesn't have a background in science needs a little bit more explanation before we get into the meat of the subject. And so when we think about audiences, it's also important to realize and ask ourselves, what kind of world is this person living in? And it's also important to realize that the world we live in as writers could be different from the world of our audience. So it's only when we ask questions, and it's only when we begin to have conversations with people who might be our readers. It's not a bad idea to pick up the phone and speak with someone who you think might be someone who will read your article down the line, and try and get a sense of what's important to them, and try and get a sense of how they speak, how they communicate, what they prioritize in life. And those are important clues which will let you know about the world of your audience. And when you know that, you can tweak your language accordingly in order to suit them better. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you would be explaining every single thing in simple terms when you're writing for an audience who already has scientific knowledge, that would be a waste of time, a waste of precious space on paper. And you would just come across as patronizing to the reader. On the other hand, you wouldn't want to introduce too much jargon to someone who doesn't have a background in science, because that would just end up alienating them and making them feel left out. So I think understanding the world of your audience and speaking to people exactly where they are is just crucial. It doesn't happen immediately for writers. It takes practice, but it's possible to get there.
Yes, and I always say to people to imagine that you're actually face to face with this individual. Like, I think for a lot of people, when they say target audience, they think of like hundreds of people or thousands of people who might read the piece, which is true, but I think the best way to approach it from a writing perspective is that it's one specific person, because there will be other people who are in the same situation as them, who have the same demographic or the same concerns or the same health issues or same questions or whatever it may be. So yes, you want to get as specific as possible, but there will still be a broader application to it. So if you imagine having someone in front of you, it's much easier, I think, to kind of attach to this idea that there are some things they care about and some things they don't care about, some things they understand, some things they don't understand, some things that would be patronizing, some things that would be overwhelming. And so I think that is one exercise that I encourage people to do. And especially if someone's coming from like a pharmacy background or, they're a clinician and they've had face-to-face conversations with either patients or healthcare professionals, they do know how they would speak differently to the two individuals. And they may also have friends or family or colleagues who they would have discussions with about these topics as well. So I think one thing is to really imagine that they're right there in front of you and that they're coming to you with questions and thinking about what you would say. And another thing is even sometimes vocalizing, almost kind of having that conversation in an audio message or a video recording where you just act as you would in that situation and then kind of capture the wording that you use. It can form as a really good basis for figuring out the tone and the positioning of the language that you're going to use. And so we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you are starting to write a piece and you're having trouble figuring out who your target audience is, I feel like this is a big struggle for a lot of people, and they may be just completely lost as to where they should start in determining that. Do you have any suggestions or advice there?
Well, so one of the things that I have done earlier in my career is to read an example written for the same type of audience that I have in mind. That's one method. The other is to, of course, speak with someone whom I consider as a target audience. And I like your point about thinking of your target audience as one person and writing for that one person, because what you write for them will be applicable to others in that situation as well. That's the second exercise. But I've relied on the first exercise of, using an example to get a sense of, how I would begin my piece. And when you talk about science, you can just keep peeling back the layers, and you can just get completely lost in peeling back the layers and not even start your piece. That can happen. To give you an example, if you need to talk about a specific pathway which happens in a specific cell, you might be wondering, do I begin by talking about this pathway? Okay, do I begin by talking about the fact that this pathway happens in cells, and so I need to talk about cells? Do I begin by saying that these cells are located in a specific tissue which is relevant to this article, so I need to speak about the physiology of that tissue? Well, this tissue is located in a specific anatomy within the human body where it's relevant to the piece, so do I have to describe anatomy? Do I have to describe the lifestyle of a person who might be having some kind of a disease where this pathway is relevant? So do I have to describe the disease? You can peel back the layers, and this can go on for a long time. before you begin writing the piece. And so I look for some examples, or I even speak with someone who might have done some writing work in that area to try and get a sense of what is a good place to start, not in terms of the words or the phrasing of the sentences, but um, in terms of all the layers that I have to peel back. How many layers back do I need to go, and how quickly can I leap into that specific topic that I like to talk about? I think answering that question of where in this timeline of science should I need to start, answering that question opens up possibilities on how you can actually begin sequencing your words together and open up your first paragraph.